She woke up on his couch. That was the first thought, simple, factual, arriving before full consciousness did. I am on a couch. Then, this is not my couch. Then, with the particular clarity that comes at 6 in the morning in a room full of floor-to-ceiling Manhattan light, I didn't go home. She hadn't planned to stay. She hadn't planned anything after the warehouse, after the tea, after the conversation that had rearranged something fundamental in the way she understood the world and her place in it. She had simply stopped moving at some point around 2 a.m., and apparently that was enough. The blanket was still around her shoulders. The same one he'd retrieved without being asked. Callie sat up slowly, pressing her hair back from her face, and took in the penthouse in the morning light for the first time. It was different from last night, less emergency, more ordinary. Books on shelves. A kitchen that had clearly been used. The city outside the windows doing what it always did, enormous and indifferent and blazing. She heard him before she saw him. A quiet movement from the kitchen, the careful sound of someone trying not to wake a person they knew was still sleeping. Dante was standing at the counter with his back to her, already fully dressed. Dark trousers, white shirt, collar closed but no tie yet. His black coffee was in his hand. Beside it on the counter sat a second cup. Also black. Untouched. He had gone somewhere before she woke up. Bought it from somewhere. He didn't know her order. She'd never told him directly, only mentioned her cart once in passing weeks ago, only ordered in front of him never. So he'd bought what he knew. Black. Wrong. And left it there without a word, without a note, without any acknowledgement that he'd done it at all. Callie looked at that cup for a moment. She got up, crossed the kitchen and picked it up. She took a sip. It was strong and entirely wrong and she didn't say a single word about it. He turned at the sound of her movement. Looked at her, the same fast assessment he always did, checking, cataloging, making sure she was whole, and then looked back at the skyline. She came to stand beside him at the window. The city spread out below them, towers and bridges and the Hudson catching the early light. She wrapped both hands around the wrong coffee and stood there in the quiet and let the morning be what it was. After a while she noticed it. On the bookshelf to the left of the window, open, accessible, placed at eye level like it had always lived there, was the Coney Island photograph. The one from the locked desk drawer. The teenage boy with the ice cream and the wonder wheel and the whole unguarded face. She didn't say anything. She felt him notice that she'd noticed. The slight shift in his breathing, the almost imperceptible stillness that meant he was aware of her awareness. He didn't explain it. She didn't ask him to. They stood at the window until his phone rang. Marco. The office. 3 things that needed decisions before 8 a.m. because the city didn't pause for anything. Not for warehouses in Red Hook, not for 2 a.m. conversations, not for mornings that felt like the first day of something with no name yet. Dante moved toward the bedroom to take the call. Callie set down the wrong coffee, mostly finished, and found her tote bag where she dropped it the night before near the couch. Same bag. First day bag. Slightly more worn at the strap than it used to be. She slung it over her shoulder and smoothed her blouse as best she could and found her shoes by the door. He came back out as she was putting them on. Still on the call. He looked at her across the room, a question in it, though he'd never phrase it that way. She straightened up. I'll see you at 7:45, she said. Like it was just another Tuesday. Like she hadn't slept on his couch wrapped in his blanket. Like nothing had changed and everything had and she was going to show up at that desk at the same time she always did because that was who she was, the person who showed up. Something moved across his face. Small. Quick. Gone before it fully formed. He nodded once. She left. The elevator ride down was quiet. The lobby was quiet. Fifth Avenue in the early morning was already running, cabs and commuters and the coffee cart on the corner putting up its awning. She bought her actual order, oat milk latte the way she liked it, warm and slightly sweet, and walked the long block to think about nothing in particular. At 7:45 she stepped off the elevator onto the 40th floor. The reception desk was exactly where she'd left it. The succulent was on the corner, slightly overdue for water. The phone console had 3 messages waiting. There was a stack of correspondence she'd been meaning to file and a calendar she'd meant to restructure yesterday. She sat down, put her tote under the desk, pulled up the calendar. At 7:46 the elevator opened and Dante walked out, suit jacket on, tie straight, expression closed and professional and entirely ordinary, and walked past her desk toward his office without breaking stride. Good morning, she said. He paused. Barely a beat. Morning, he said, and kept walking. The door closed. The office was quiet. In his kitchen 40 floors below the streets, the wrong black coffee sat empty on the counter of a penthouse that had felt, for one morning, less like a fortress. Callie opened her calendar and got to work. The morning after changes everything, and we're just getting started. You're on Nicoai's Stories. Subscribe so you don't miss a single moment of part 2. The weeks that followed were careful. That was the only word for it. Careful. The way you move through a room where something fragile has been set down in an unexpected place. Not avoiding it, just aware of it, adjusting your step without making a production of the adjustment. The 40th floor was the same as it had always been. Dark carpet, slate walls, expensive silence. The men in suits came and went. The phone lines blinked. Marco moved through the space with his usual watchful efficiency. Nothing had changed technically. Everything had changed technically. No one said anything about it. Dante started answering her questions. Not all of them. He was still Dante, still precise and guarded and incapable of small talk as a concept. But the questions he'd spent weeks deflecting or simply not acknowledging began to receive responses. Short ones. Factual. But responses. Did you always drink it black? She'd asked one morning, nodding at his coffee. Yes. Even as a kid? Pause. The briefest flicker of something. My father did. I thought it made him look serious. She'd looked at him. He'd looked at his desk. That was the end of it. But she filed it away. A small door cracked open and she would not push it, but she would remember it was there. She learned he hadn't eaten a proper lunch in what appeared to be several years. She discovered this by accident. Overhearing Marco tell someone on the phone that the boss didn't take a lunch hour, hadn't since the gallows situation 2 years back, wouldn't sit still long enough. She started leaving things on his desk. Nothing elaborate. A sandwich from the good place on 48th. A container of soup on cold days. A paper bag of almonds and an apple on the days she was in a hurry. She never mentioned it. He never mentioned it. The containers came back empty. She caught him almost smiling once. She'd been trying to print a 40-page document and had accidentally printed 400 pages instead, and the printer had made a sound like a small animal in distress before producing an enormous cascade of paper that flowed across the floor of the copy room in a slow-motion wave. She'd stared at it, said nothing for 5 full seconds, then turned around to find Dante standing in the doorway. He'd come to ask her something, she assumed, and instead found this, and his expression had done something at the corner, the very edge of his mouth, the suggestion of something. Then he'd caught her looking at him. They'd both looked away simultaneously. Marco had appeared behind Dante a moment later, assessed the paper catastrophe, looked between the two of them and walked away without a word. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks after the penthouse, a cold October Saturday with no particular reason to be anywhere, Dante found himself walking through Tribeca. This was not unusual. He walked when he needed to think, always had the city's rhythm better than sitting still. He turned a corner and stopped. There was a coffee cart on the intersection. Small. Blue awning. A handwritten menu board. He'd walked past it 100 times without registering it. He registered it now. Because Callie had mentioned it, months ago, offhandedly, in the context of explaining why she came in slightly later on the day she stopped for coffee. There's this cart near the building, their oat milk latte is actually really good, which I know sounds like something you don't care about, and he had filed it away in the part of his mind that filed things without his permission. He stood at the cart and ordered one. Oat milk latte. He did not examine why. He walked the rest of his route holding it. He didn't drink it. He didn't know what it was supposed to taste like, what she always got exactly, whether the size was right. He poured it out at a trash can a block later, but he stood at that cart for a moment first and tried to understand what she found good about it, and that was its own kind of learning. The following Tuesday, Julian Reyes came to the office. He was everything his file said he was. Late 30s, sharp, the kind of handsome that came with tailored suits and easy confidence. He handled 2 of Romano Acquisition's legitimate legal portfolios, primarily real estate. He'd been to the floor before, but always when Dante's previous assistants were in place. Efficient, professional, invisible. Callie was not invisible. Julian noticed her approximately 45 seconds after stepping off the elevator. She was on the phone, color-coded files spread across her desk, a sticky note on her wrist because she'd run out of notepad space. She held up one finger to him, 1 second. Finished her call and looked up with her full, complete attention. Hi, I'm Callie. You're here for Mr. Romano? Julian Reyes smiled at her the way men smile when they have not been given undivided attention in a while and find it unexpectedly arresting. Julian Reyes, he said. And yes, but there's no rush. He knows I'm coming. The meeting ran 40 minutes. When Julian left, he stopped at her desk again. Any chance you'd want to grab lunch sometime? He asked. Best Italian place 2 blocks from here, you'd love it. Callie laughed. The way she laughed when she was genuinely caught off guard and hadn't armored up against it. Oh, that's really kind, thank you. No pressure, Julian said, easy as anything. Think about it. He left. She turned back to her computer, still slightly flushed, still smiling at the unexpectedness of it. Across the floor, through the glass partition of his office door, Dante watched. His expression didn't change. His jaw tightened by exactly 1 degree. His pen stopped moving on the document in front of him for a moment that was precisely 1 moment too long. Marco, who had been watching Dante watch Callie, turned back to his own work and said nothing. That evening, after the floor had emptied and the last of the day's calls were done, Dante sat at his desk. The city was going dark outside his windows. He had 3 documents in front of him that he had not advanced by a single line in 40 minutes. He sat with them anyway. He was not a man who sat doing nothing. He had never had the patience for stillness that wasn't purposeful. He sat for another 20 minutes doing nothing. He didn't hear Callie come to his door. She didn't knock, she never knocked when it was just a note, she just reached quietly around the doorframe and pressed a sticky note to his monitor and left. He heard the soft sound of her tote bag, the elevator button, the doors. Then he was alone. He looked at the monitor. The note said, "You seemed off today. Hope you're okay." No name. No explanation. 4 words and a period and the particular Callie-ness of it, straightforward, no performance, just the actual thought she'd had and the decision to say it. He read it once. He read it again. He opened his desk drawer. He placed the note inside, carefully folded once. He closed the drawer. Outside the window, Manhattan ran its usual electric indifference 40 floors below. In the drawer, the first sticky note he hadn't thrown away sat in the dark, small and certain, and kept. Julian Reyes came back the following week. This was not unusual, he had legitimate business with the firm, always had. But he stopped at Callie's desk on the way in and on the way out, and the conversations were easy and warm and ran a few minutes longer each time. He made her laugh twice on a Wednesday. Dante heard it from behind the closed office door and found a reason to come out both times. He had no reason to come out either time. He came out anyway. The problem was not Julian. Dante was clear-eyed enough to know that. The problem was that he had no language for what he wanted to say, no practice syntax for "I am asking you not to go to lunch with him," because that sentence required him to first say other sentences he hadn't managed yet, sentences that began with "I want" and ended with "you" and were the most exposed thing he could imagine saying out loud to another human being. He had walked through situations that would have broken most men. He had sat across tables from people who wanted him dead and felt nothing but calculation. He had inherited an empire at 22 with nothing but grief and determination and not flinched. He could not figure out how to tell Callie Brooks that he didn't want her to have lunch with Julian Reyes. The Brooklyn meeting was on a Thursday. Julian's firm, Reyes and Associates, a glass and steel building in Dumbo with a view of the bridge, was hosting a quarterly review of the Romano real estate holdings. Standard. Legitimate. The kind of meeting that required Dante and required Callie because she managed his schedule and his documents and had reorganized the entire acquisition portfolio into a system so logical that Marco had once said, with full sincerity, that she had done in 6 weeks what 3 previous assistants hadn't managed in 2 years combined. She got into the black SUV. He was already inside. She settled into the seat beside him, not close, not far, the professional distance they always maintained in transit, and the car pulled into Fifth Avenue traffic. The drive to Dumbo was 40 minutes in Thursday morning traffic. 40 minutes. He looked out his window. She looked out hers. The Brooklyn Bridge appeared through the glass and disappeared again. A cab cut them off somewhere on the approach and Marco, in the front seat, said something quietly to the driver that Callie elected not to parse. The tension in the car was not the tension of danger. It was worse than that. It was the tension of 2 people very carefully not looking at each other in an enclosed space when looking at each other was the only thing either of them was actually thinking about. Callie broke first. She turned from her window. Looked at him. He didn't turn, but the slight change in his posture told her he knew. "You know you can just talk to me," she said. "Like a person. I've seen you almost smile 3 times this week and you keep pulling it back like it costs you something." He was quiet for a moment. Then he turned. The city slid past the windows behind him. He looked at her the way he did when he'd stopped performing something and started just existing. Full, unhidden, the version of his face she'd only seen a handful of times and that she thought about more than was professionally advisable. "It used to," he said. She didn't say anything. She held his gaze for a moment, and then she turned back to her window because she needed somewhere to put the weight of that sentence, and the window was what was available. Used to. Past tense. The space between that and now was a decade, a dead brother, an empire, 10 years of choosing calcification over exposure because exposure was how you lost things. She knew all of that. She'd known it since the photograph, since Coney Island and the stories he'd told her, since every small piece he'd offered, like a man testing the load-bearing capacity of something he was afraid to fully trust. The car arrived in Dumbo. They got out. Said nothing more about it. The meeting was in a long glass conference room on the 6th floor with a view of the Manhattan Bridge and far too many people who wanted Dante's signature on things. Callie sat at the end of the table and managed the documents and the timeline with the calm efficiency that had come, over months, to feel like a natural extension of how the room ran. Julian hosted the meeting well. He was good at it, measured, clear, thorough without being exhausting. He greeted Callie when they arrived with genuine warmth, showed her where the coffee was, made sure she had everything she needed for the session. Dante watched all of this from his end of the table. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The particular quality of his silence was its own presence in the room. After the meeting, while the others gathered their things and the room slowly emptied, Callie stepped out through the glass door onto the building's small rooftop terrace. Just a few floors up, an outdoor space with a railing and an unobstructed angle on the Manhattan skyline across the water. The October air was sharp. The river was steel gray and choppy. She stood at the railing and breathed. She heard the door behind her. She didn't turn, but she knew his footstep. She'd learned it months ago, the particular cadence of it, unhurried and certain. He came to stand beside her. Not close. Just beside. The view opened out ahead of them. The bridges, the towers, the river, Manhattan glittering even in flat October light like it was lit from something inside. She was looking at it. He was looking at her. She felt it the way you feel sunlight on the side of your face, not looking at the source but aware of the warmth and the direction of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Callie. Just her name. Like he'd been turning it over for weeks, testing the weight of it, deciding whether he could say it out loud and mean everything he meant by it. Just, Callie. Like it was the only word he had left and he'd chosen to spend it carefully. She turned. He was looking at her. His face was open, almost the way it had been at 2 a.m. in the penthouse, the walls mostly down, and his mouth was slightly open, the next sentence right there, clearly right there, and then he stopped. His jaw closed. His eyes stayed on her. He breathed out slowly through his nose. He couldn't say it. Not yet. Not standing on a rooftop in Dumbo with Julian Ray's law firm behind them and the whole complicated architecture of what he was and what she was and what this thing between them might mean, pressing down on every word he was trying to form. Callie looked at him. She didn't push. She didn't fill the silence with something easier. She just stood beside him, close enough that their arms were almost touching in the cold air, and let him have the almost. Let it exist between them without requiring it to become something more formed than it was yet. After a moment she looked back at the skyline. After another moment he did too. They rode the elevator down together. In the lobby Julian was waiting, coat on, easy smile, clearly wrapping up for the day. He caught Callie's eye and tilted his head slightly toward the door. A question unspoken. The lunch offer still open. She held up one finger. He waited. She walked over. Julian. She kept her voice kind because she was always kind, because that was one of the things about her that couldn't be turned off. I think you already know the answer. He looked at her for a moment. Then he glanced, just once, brief and readable, across the lobby toward where Dante stood waiting, watching nothing in particular with the focused attention of a man watching something very specific. Julian smiled. Not disappointed. Something more like recognition. Yeah, he said. I think I did. He shook Dante's hand on his way out. Dante shook it back. A full, firm, professional handshake. Neither of them said anything that required the other to respond. The door closed behind him. Marco called that night at 9. Dante was at his desk. Callie had gone home an hour earlier. He'd watched the elevator doors close behind her, same as every night, and gone back to his papers. She's not Gallo, Marco said when Dante picked up. Her name is Elena March. Gallo's former lieutenant. Chicago. She's been consolidating since we took him down. Pause. She's smarter. She's not coming for Callie directly. She's coming for your cover. Your name. She has a journalist. Dante sat back in his chair. What does she want? Territory. The West Side Holdings. She steps back from the journalist if you step back from the waterfront. A long silence. When do I need to decide? Dante asked. She gave you a week. He hung up. He sat in the dark office for a long time, the city humming below him, the drawer to his left holding one folded sticky note that said "Hope you're okay" in handwriting he could have drawn from memory. He didn't sleep much that night. He said her name like it was the only word he had left. You're watching Nikolai's stories. Share this with someone who needs a slow burn love story in their life right now. Elena March moved on a Monday. The story ran in a small but credible financial news outlet. A carefully placed item about inconsistencies in Romano Acquisition's ownership structure, unnamed sources, the suggestion of questions that should be asked. It wasn't enough to collapse anything. It was enough to create noise. Enough to make lawyers nervous and phones ring and a particular kind of attention shift toward a building on Fifth Avenue that ran very smoothly on the assumption that no one was looking too closely. The 40th floor went into a different mode. Dante was in meetings from 7 in the morning. Legal, internal, crisis management, 2 calls to people Callie had never spoken to and whose names she didn't recognize. Marco moved through the space with his jaw set and his phone constantly present. The men near the elevator stood differently, closer, more attentive. And Dante went behind every wall. Not all at once. Gradually. The way a door closes slowly in a draft. You don't notice it happening until the light is gone. He stopped answering her questions again. Stopped lingering at the coffee machine. The almost smile disappeared entirely. When she put the lunch container on his desk on Tuesday, it came back untouched. He was still in the building. Still at his desk, still in his meetings, still her boss in every technical and formal sense. But the version of him she'd been learning, the one with the Coney Island photograph on the bookshelf and the wrong black coffee in the morning and a used to in the back of a car over the bridge, that version had gone somewhere interior and locked the door behind it. She understood why. She didn't like it. She said nothing. All of Tuesday. All of Wednesday. She filed his correspondence and managed his calendar and kept the 40th floor running and did not push. Thursday she put a note on his monitor, still here. Just so you know. He didn't respond. But the note wasn't in the trash at the end of the day. On Saturday morning she bought 2 coffees, her oat milk latte and a black coffee for him from the cart with the blue awning that she'd mentioned once and that she now knew he'd stood in front of at some point because Marco had let it slip, baffled by the story weeks ago. She took the subway to Tribeca. She pressed the penthouse buzzer. A long pause. Then the door. He was in a gray pullover and dark trousers. No suit, no tie, the most casual she'd ever seen him. And he looked at her on his doorstep with an expression that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. She held out the black coffee. Come somewhere with me, she said. Just for a few hours. No phones, no Marco, no journalists. The empire will survive a Sunday. He looked at her. At the coffee. At her again. It's Saturday, he said. Then it'll definitely survive. She raised her eyebrows. Come on. He held her gaze for a moment with the particular expression of a man who knows he's going to say yes and is deciding whether to waste time pretending otherwise. Then he took the coffee. He stepped back inside. He came back 2 minutes later with his jacket. He followed her out the door. Just like that. The F train to Coney Island took 45 minutes. They sat beside each other in the subway car, which was nearly empty on a cold October Saturday morning, with their coffees and said very little. The city slid past the windows and gradually became less city and more something older, the buildings lower, the light different, until the train came above ground in Brooklyn and ran elevated through neighborhoods that had a different texture than Manhattan, quieter and wider and more human-scaled. Dante sat with his black coffee and looked out the window. She sat with her oat milk latte and looked at him looking out the window. The Wonder Wheel appeared in the distance before the station did. She watched his face when he saw it. Just for a second, the way his eyes found it and then went somewhere internal. She didn't say anything. They walked the boardwalk in the October wind, which was considerable and insistent and entirely indifferent to who either of them was. Callie bought them both soft-serve ice cream from the one stand that was still open this late in the season. White chocolate for her, classic vanilla for him, which he accepted with the slightly confused expression of a man who has not eaten ice cream in approximately a decade and is not sure how to feel about starting again. He ate it anyway. They walked. The beach was mostly empty, a few couples, a man with a dog, 2 kids throwing things at the waves. The Wonder Wheel turned slowly against the gray sky. The ocean was restless and cold and very large. She let the walk be what it was. She didn't manufacture conversation. She didn't fill the air. She just walked beside him and ate her ice cream and let the October wind do what it wanted with her hair and trusted that this, being here, being present, not requiring anything from the moment, was the right thing to offer. At some point she took out her phone. He was standing at the railing near the water, looking out at the horizon. His ice cream was finished. His hands were in his jacket pockets. His hair was slightly disrupted by the wind, the first time she'd seen it anything other than perfect, and his face was turned away from her, toward the water, toward the wheel, toward something she couldn't see. She took the photo. She looked at it afterward. Stood there for a moment just looking. He looked exactly like the boy in the desk drawer photograph. Same eyes, the same quality of distance in them, looking at something the immediate world didn't contain. Same angle of the jaw. Older, yes. Harder in the way that life makes a person harder. But the same boy underneath all of it. She crossed the boardwalk to where he stood. She held out the phone. He looked at the screen. The silence that followed was long enough that the wind changed direction twice. I haven't been here since Nico died, he said finally. His voice was even. Careful. The way it got when he was managing something large. I know, she said. That's why we're here. He looked at her. Not the careful managed look. The other one. The one he couldn't fully control, the one that lived behind the one he chose. And for a moment, standing on the Coney Island boardwalk in October wind with ice cream wrappers in their pockets, it was just that look and nothing else between them. Something gave way in him. Quietly. Not dramatically, he didn't collapse, didn't make a sound, didn't look away. He just breathed. One full breath, slow and deliberate and entirely unguarded, the kind that breaks something loose on its way out. He reached over and took her hand. His hand was cold from the wind and very certain. Not tentative, not questioning, just a decision made and executed the same way he made every decision he was actually sure about. His fingers closed around hers. She let him. They stood at the railing for a long time. The ocean moved. The wheel turned. The wind came off the water and went where it wanted. She felt the slight pressure of his grip and didn't move and didn't speak and let the afternoon be exactly what it was. He held her hand for the rest of the day. The papers were waiting when they got back to Manhattan. Marco met them in the penthouse lobby, not the office, he'd been careful about that, with a folder and an expression that said everything in 2 seconds flat. Dante read it in the elevator. Callie stood slightly to the side and watched his face move through something she'd never seen it move through before. A decision being made not by calculation but by clarity. It was a territory concession. Chicago's West Side Holdings, 6 years of careful, patient work, a position Dante had built and maintained through deals that had cost him and then cost him again. A signature on the right document would satisfy Elena March's power play, kill the journalist's story, and keep Callie's name out of anything connected to the Romano family permanently. He took the pen from Marco without being asked. He signed. The whole thing took 11 seconds. Marco took the folder. Didn't say anything. He had known Dante Romano for 8 years and had never seen him sign away territory that wasn't already lost. He had also never seen him ride the F train to Coney Island on a Saturday. He went to make the necessary calls. Dante looked at Callie across the lobby. It's handled, he said. I heard. She held his gaze. Are you okay? Yes. She nodded. She believed him, not because he said so, but because she'd learned to read the particular quality of his yes, and this one was the true kind. Something had lifted, not been buried. He held the elevator door for her. They rode back up together in the quiet. 3 weeks after Coney Island, something had shifted in the 40th floor's atmosphere in a way that everyone noticed and no one mentioned. It was small things. The lunch containers came back empty every day now without exception. The almost smile had become a different thing, not hidden, just rare, arriving only when Callie did something that caught him genuinely off guard, which was still roughly twice a week because she was still Callie. Marco had, on 2 separate occasions, caught Dante standing at the reception desk for no apparent operational reason, having a conversation about nothing in particular that ran several minutes past the point of any practical purpose. Marco kept these observations to himself. He was a careful man. On a Tuesday morning, early before anyone else arrived, before the coffee was made or the phones were lit or the day had begun in any formal sense, Callie came off the elevator to find something on her desk. A key. Single. Plain. On a small ring with no markings. She picked it up. Turned it over. Looked up. Dante was standing in the doorway of his office. He'd arrived even earlier than usual. She hadn't seen the light under the door when she came in. He was in his suit already, jacket on, fully composed, watching her hold the key with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite managing it. Is this, she started. Penthouse, he said. In case of emergencies. In case she needed somewhere to go. In case it was 2 a.m. after a warehouse in Red Hook and she needed a couch and a blanket and a wrong black coffee in the morning. In case she ever wanted to come back and needed to be able to do it without having to ask. In case was the closest he could get to I want you to have this, and she knew that, and it was enough. He turned and walked into his office. The door closed. Callie stood at her desk holding the key. She sat down slowly. Opened her palm and looked at it, Small, unremarkable, impossibly weighted, and then she smiled. Not a polite smile, not a professional smile. The kind that starts somewhere behind the sternum and arrives at the face before you've consented to it, warm and involuntary and entirely real. She put the key on her keychain. There were 2 keys on the ring now. Her Columbus, Ohio apartment key, the one she'd had since she moved, the one that opened the door to the life she'd had before all of this, and this one. The penthouse. 2 worlds on the same ring, and she carried both of them from now on. From across the floor, Marco Vitali witnessed this. He had been present for many things in 8 years. Negotiations that could have gone any direction, moments that had required everything he had, decisions that kept him awake. He was not a sentimental man and had not been for a long time. He allowed himself, in the privacy of his own face, a very small smile. Then he went to make the coffee. She was still at her desk at 9 that night. This was not unusual. It had never been unusual from the very first week. She simply stayed when there was more to do, and there was always more to do, and she'd decided a long time ago that she didn't mind the late quiet of the floor when the city outside the windows was going full tilt and the desk lamp threw its small warm circle and everything felt manageable. She was cross-referencing a shipping manifest against a property ledger, the kind of work that required attention and nothing else, when she heard the elevator. Dante came off it fully dressed. He'd been in a meeting somewhere below, she'd known from the calendar, and crossed the floor to her desk. He stopped in front of it. "Come up to the roof," he said. She looked up. The Romano Acquisitions building had a rooftop terrace. She'd known it existed in the abstract sense. She'd seen the door on the stairwell landing, always locked, and had assumed it was mechanical access. No one had ever mentioned it as a place. It had never appeared in any calendar. She closed the manifest. The terrace was accessed through a stairwell door that required a separate key, his key which he produced without ceremony, and then they were outside and the city was everywhere. It was different from the street. Different from the windows. Up here there was no glass between them and it, just open air and the cold November night and Manhattan blazing in every direction like it was trying to prove something. The skyline she'd looked at from 40 floors of windows for months now felt different with wind in it, real and vast and very close. There was a small table. 2 chairs. Someone had been up here, she understood it had been arranged, that this hadn't been improvised in the last hour. Black coffee for him, set in a small thermos. And for her, oat milk latte from the cart with the blue awning, her exact order, still warm inside its paper cup. She picked it up. Looked at it. He had written it down. Weeks ago, she pictured it, a slip of paper, his precise handwriting given to Marco with no explanation, the order memorized from nothing she'd ever told him directly except one passing mention months ago that he had apparently kept and finally acted on. He got it exactly right. She sat down. He sat across from her. The city hummed 40 floors below. The wind moved around them and went on. "I need to tell you something," he said. His voice was level. But she'd learned his voice, the different registers of it, what each cadence meant. And this one meant he'd decided something in advance and was going to stay decided no matter how it landed. "About what I am," he continued. "What this life is. Not the version I maintain for other people. Not the corporate structure or the holdings or the version that has a website. Pause. The actual thing. All of it. The history, the choices. The ones I made and the ones I inherited and the ones I'd make differently and the ones I wouldn't. All of it." He looked at her across the table. The city made its noise around them. "Because I want you to stay," he said. And there it was, the sentence he'd been building to, the one that had cost him weeks of approach. "I want that. Clearly and without qualification, I want that. So if you're going to stay, you deserve to know exactly what you're staying for." She folded her hands around her latte and looked at him. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." He told her. All of it. Not the curated version, not the version with the plausible edges. The Romano family, the history that ran 3 generations back, the machinery he'd inherited at 22 and what it actually did and how. The deals. The people. The cost of what he was and what he ran, spoken clearly and without euphemism. The things he'd done that he didn't regret and the things he'd done that he did and the parts of the business that were going to be what they were regardless of what happened next. The real version of Dante Romano. Spoken out loud for the first time to another human being. She listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't flinch or look away or reach for her phone or change the quality of her attention by so much as a degree. She sat across from him at the small table with the city blazing behind her and listened the way she listened to everything, completely, without performance, like what he was saying was the most important thing in the room. When he finished, the city was still there. The wind was still moving. The latte was cooling in her hands. She was still there. Okay, she said. He looked at her. Okay. I already knew most of it. She said it simply, not as a challenge. I've known for a while. You don't work somewhere for this long, around the people you have around you, and stay that naive. Pause. I chose to stay before tonight. I'm still choosing. I just wanted you to know that the telling didn't change it. He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her across the small table, the city burning behind her, and something in his face moved. Not slowly, all at once. Like something that had been held in place by a specific, deliberate effort simply stopped being held. No wall. No management. No performance of composure. Just him. I don't know how to love someone without losing them, he said. Barely above a whisper. The most honest sentence he'd ever constructed. I have tried, I have looked at the problem from every angle, and I don't know how to do it without expecting it to end. Because it has always ended. Everyone I have ever... He stopped. Started again. I don't know how to do this without waiting for you to leave. Callie looked at him. At the face she'd been learning for months. The jaw, the eyes, the place where his expression lived when he wasn't controlling it. At the man who had gone to Red Hook alone. Who had put a photograph on a bookshelf. Who had bought a wrong black coffee at 6 in the morning because he didn't know her order yet, but he knew she'd need something. I know, she said. Neither do I. She set down the latte. But I tripped over your elevator floor on my first day and spilled coffee all over your suit, and you didn't fire me. I called Vincent Gallohan on the phone and you didn't fire me. I fell asleep at my desk and you put your jacket over me and signed my permanent contract and moved my desk away from the window and followed me to Coney Island on the F train. She smiled, the involuntary one, the real one. I think we have a pretty decent track record of getting through things we didn't plan for. He looked at her. Then Dante Romano, most feared man in New York, son of Brooklyn, ruler of an empire he'd never wanted and had run anyway with everything he had for 10 years, laughed. It was small. Quiet. A little rusty, like something that hadn't been used in long enough that it needed a moment to find its form. But it was real, fully, completely real, and it changed his whole face. The jaw, the eyes, the mouth, all of it, it shifted into something that looked exactly like the boy in the Coney Island photograph, and she stared at him because she needed to look at it, needed to keep the image of it because she wanted to remember this specific moment for the rest of her life. He noticed her staring. His eyebrow went up. What? Nothing, she said. She shook her head, still smiling. You should do that more. He looked at her for a moment. Then he reached across the small table, unhurried, certain, the same way he'd reached for her hand on the boardwalk in the October wind, and took her hand. His fingers closed around hers. Warm this time, not cold. The city blazing behind her, around them, everywhere. He didn't let go. The empire stood. The city ran on, as it always had and always would. Indifferent and relentless and blazing with its own specific, enormous life. Marco Vitali went home at 7:30 that evening, which was the earliest he had left the office in 8 years. He did not remark on this to anyone. On Tuesday morning of the following week, early before anyone arrived, a second succulent appeared on the reception desk. Small. Round. In a white ceramic pot. Set exactly beside the first one, which had been there since Callie's second week and which she had watered every Monday and Thursday without fail. No card. No note. No explanation offered to anyone who asked, though no one asked because the floor had collectively decided not to. Callie came in at 7:42. She set her tote bag under her desk. She put her coffee on its coaster. She pulled up the calendar. Then she looked at the reception desk. She looked at the second succulent for a long moment. She didn't say anything. She got up. She watered both of them. And at 7:45 the elevator opened and Dante Romano walked out, suit perfect, expression settled, the contained and professional version of his face fully in place, and walked past her desk toward his office. He didn't look at the plant. But as he passed her desk, his pace slowed by a fraction, barely perceptible, not even enough to call a pause, and when he reached his office door he glanced back. She was already looking at him. He turned away, opened the door, went inside. The door closed. The floor was quiet. The city moved outside the windows. The two succulents sat side by side on the reception desk in the morning light, small and ordinary and together. Callie turned back to her calendar and smiled at it. And there it is, loves. Dante and Callie, the most unexpected, most beautiful beginning. Thank you for writing this whole journey on Nikolai's stories. If this story found its way into your heart, share it, subscribe to the channel and stay close, because we are far from done. More stories are coming. You know where to find them.